The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is proposing a new policy that will put families with mixed immigration status at risk of losing their homes. If the policy happens, it would prohibit financial assistance to certain categories of non-citizens in public housing programs and would require verification of immigration status of all applicants regardless of age. Joining us to discuss this and other issues impacting low-income residents is Jacquelynne Bowman, Executive Director of Greater Boston Legal Services. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is important to talk about here. I really want to get into the policy change. Who would this impact?
This would impact U.S. citizen children, as well as their parents who may not have documentation or enough documentation to be in the United States. So we're very concerned. These families are low-income families. That's why they're in public housing. And if they are excluded from public housing, then they're facing either family separation or homelessness.
So we know public comments are open for this policy change until a little later this month. What legal recourse will you have if this policy changes?
Well, we're submitting public comments right now, and we're also considering what avenues there might be in order to protect families. We believe that there might be some constitutional issues at risk here, as well as just sort of the basic moral concerns about children who are U.S. citizens.
Right. Greater Boston Legal Services was established, over a century ago to help women and immigrants, a law firm for the low-income community. In what ways has that work changed, and how has it stayed focused on the same mission?
Well, our mission, of course, is to be a law firm for low-income immigrants, low-income community members, not just immigrants. And so the challenge that we have is that we have focused on the communities where people are most marginalized and most at risk. And that tends to be communities where there are significant numbers of people of color. So we have policies that basically say, don't shield immigrants. We have policies that basically say, don't promote diversity, equity, or inclusion. And a lot of the work that we do circles around including people who have been marginalized, people who've been excluded from the justice system. And we want to make sure that people have fair access to justice, that people are having their rights enforced in a way that protects them and allows them to meet their basic needs. And that's what's happening, is that all of these policies appear to target that, taking away the safety nets, requiring people to do various different things in order to even qualify for things that they need, like food stamps, SNAP benefits, in order to meet their basic human needs. So it seems like it's a really, really cruel approach, targeting people who are very low income. To qualify for our services, a family of four has to make less than $41,000 a year. In the greater Boston area, you can't really survive on that. You need $60,000 at least to be able to get a two-bedroom apartment. So these policies are really sort of targeting the people who are most at risk, our most vulnerable neighbors. And we're very, very concerned about what that means. I mean, this is a rich country, and we've sort of, as a nation, identified various different policies that will make it very, very difficult and challenging for people who live in deep poverty to be able to meet their basic needs. And that is a shame for our country.
Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley led an effort for a discharge petition for a House vote on TPS, temporary protected status for Haitian immigrants. Well, if this vote passes, it would extend protections through 2029. What does your organization do for people whose TPS status has been in flux during this administration?
Well, the challenge is what information people are hearing from their friends, from the neighborhood, and from media. Right now, there's a pause on TPS status, but people are being told that they no longer have work authorizations, that they're no longer able to work. And some people are afraid and are trying to get ahead of the system and moving out of the United States. People are afraid. People don't know what to do. And we're talking about people with TPS status, not just Haitian families who are relatively new to TPS, but Central Americans who have been here for more than 20 years. What does that do to your life if you don't know from day to day whether you're going to be allowed to stay, whether you're going to be allowed to stay with your family or your friends that you've sort of built up over the last 20 years? And that's sort of the challenge. And so what we're doing is we're talking about know your rights kinds of programs. We're looking at people's legal rights. A number of people have a right to file for asylum and can qualify for asylum. So we're helping them work through what are their rights and what are the things that they can do in order to remain in the United States.
Yeah, I saw that you're doing clinics, right? Because making sure people know your rights is a big part of what you do. Talk about some of the education you provide.
So we work with our community partners to go into the community and talk about what people's rights are. For example, what do you do when ICE comes to your door? And there are a number of things that we talk to people about. We also talk to people about what their legal rights are. If you have a work authorization, what does that mean? We work with people to make sure that they have legal work authorizations. We work with people in order to just basically say, you have the right to do this, you have the right to do that, and to educate people. I think it's really important. If people know what their rights are, then I think they can protect themselves in a better way.
We appreciate you being here. And by the way, we have to quickly mention that you're getting a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association. So congratulations to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And shedding a light on the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.